All right. Thank you. Just give me a shout.
Okay,
I don't
thanks.
see you, so you have to really tell me.
Don't see this image here,
No, because I've got screen
maybe.
sharing and it's full screen,
Ah,
but
okay,
I can,
okay.
hold
No,
on.
no,
If I do
that's
this,
fine. That's
how is that?
fine.
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
That's fine. I'm the one here waving. So anyway, okay.
All right.
Talk to you soon. Steven, Louis, ich kennengelernt. Hier nachträglich kennengelernt. Ja, ich fange gerade mit Ihrer Kontakt. Hello, Babak. I'm Raymond. Hello, you hear me?
Yes, I am hearing you.
Ah, fine. Okay. We will start just in a minute. Huh? Thank you.
Sure.
So, yes, I see. Ah, ja. Ja, nachher. Okay, Babak, you can see me, huh? And us, huh? We are here plenty in the room. I hope you can listen to us, and I try to introduce yourself, or maybe you add also some more points because I don't have many things about you, but
Okay.
well, okay. I think we should start. Um, hello, hello, everybody. Please join us here in front. So thank you very much to come in after this nice, beautiful starting with Martin Ott. And so I have the pleasure to present on the screen. And yeah, he has also an insight in our room here. And of Babak Fakhamzadeh. I hope I spelled it quite well. Oh, he disappeared already?
Oh,
No, he will come. And we will really switch from the analog experience outside into a more technical or digital experience of walking, huh, as I understood well. And Baba is a recognized creative technologist and media artist, bridging digital innovation, place-based storytelling. So this question of narrative is also here present. And I don't know, Baba, where we are finding you here on the screen.
as
Please,
in,
when
where am
you,
I? You mean?
yeah. Okay, fine. So the screen or the screen reality is yours, huh? With the presentation of the topic modern situation from three scenes, resisting the commercialization of movement. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Thank you, Johannes, I think it was, right? Because I've already seen three people this morning. Thank you for being here and taking the time on a Sunday morning at 10 a.m. to listen what I have to say. Now, I'll first start with an apology because even though it might be 10 a.m. where you guys are, I'm based in Brazil, but currently I am in Buenos Aires, and here it's just a few minutes after 5 a.m. On a Sunday morning. So it's a little bit early. So forgive me if my train of thought goes astray on this at this early hour, but I'll try to do my best to stay coherent. And maybe in Buenos Aires, it's even more relevant at this time because Saturday night partying starts typically only after 2 a.m. So the first people maybe only starting now in the clubs of Buenos Aires. But the wine and the parties notwithstanding, let me start by talking to you about from streets to screens, resisting the commercialization of movement. Now I'm going to switch to my presentation and I will stop seeing you. So that means that if you have a question, you're welcome to intervene at any point, but I won't be able to see you raising your hand. So somebody would have to grab the mic or we wait until the end for questions. So I would like to start with a perhaps deceptively simple question, even though I'm also, I believe, preaching to the choir, so I might not need to elaborate as much as I would in other situations. And the question is this: when you walk through the city, who really decides where you go? And that's where the preaching to the choir comes in, because probably you are all very aware that in a built environment, our movements tend to be directed by urban planning, commercialization, and increasingly, and that's where I'm going to go with this presentation, by digital technologies. Johannes introduced myself earlier, but I'll expand a little bit on this. I'm one of the co-founders of an NGO called Walk, Listen, Create. Some of you might be familiar with this. We were founded 5 or 6 years ago. And Walk, Listen, Create is the home of walking artists and artist walkers. That is to say, creatives who in one way or the other use walking as an integral part of their artistic practice. I'm also the co-creator and maintainer of a mobile app called Derive app, which is based on the ideas of the situationists. And I will get to that in a second about the app. But the story that I am telling you now is really about how the ideas of the situationists from the 1950s and 60s are increasingly applicable today in the datafied city. And you might be familiar, you probably are familiar with the Derive as both a playful and critical methodology. And I make the case that we can now, or should now, extend this into the digital realm. Presentation mode, I have to figure out how to go to the next slide. Yes, that works. So first, a step back, a little bit of context. What is psychogeography, or maybe a refresher? It is the study of how environments shape our emotions and behaviors, or in a simpler way, psychogeography is how a place makes you feel. And the connected concept with this, or the connected tool or methodology, is the Derive, which is a drifting without a plan, guided by chance and effect. And this comes from the idea or the concept of psychogeography, and the methodology of the Derive goes back to the situationists, who in the 1950s and 60s identified cities as being shaped by capitalism to encourage shopping, efficiency, and spectacle. And so the critique that the situationists brought forward was a critique of consumption, the consumption shaping the experience of the individual in the built environment. And with the Derive and other tools that they developed, they tried to facilitate a way to reclaim autonomy by the individual through moving against the grain. Now, that same logic, I argue, of the 1950s and 60s of the public space being commercialized has expanded today, or really over the last 20 years, into the digital realm, that is our private spaces. Whereas the situationists resisted the commercialization of urban space, big tech today pushes the commodification into our private lives via screens, apps, and constant digital mediation. And it is here that, yes, This presentation and my central point connects to one of the themes of our conference here in Switzerland. And that is through the theme, and now I'm going to try my German, of digitale Mobilität und die Zukunft des Gehens. Gehen als hybridisch Phänomen zwischen physischer Bewegung und digitaler Steuerung. That is to say, in short, or my interpretation of that is walking is to see walking as a hybrid between physical and digital control. And that's because more and more walking in a built environment is now shaped simultaneously by physical design as well as by digital overlays, and more by digital overlays. Oh, it's too fast, sorry. And very practical examples of how this is achieved, this manipulation through digital overlays, is by digital navigation, such as tools like Google Maps or Apple Maps or other mapping applications, gamification like Pokemon Go or Ingress, or geocaching, which itself moved from the analog to the digital, and surveillance and tracking tools like Fitbit and Strava and other data and data monetization tools. So digital overlays now script our physical movements as much or more so than features of the built environment or architectural design did or has been doing since from the post-war World War II period onwards. And so we should ask ourselves, when we follow these apps, when we use these apps to navigate, are we walking freely or are we being walked? Now, one of the ways in which I mentioned earlier, the situationists pushed back against this manipulation in the public space was the methodology of the dérive. And I mentioned also earlier that 14 years ago or so, I was one of the creators of an app called Dérive App, which was inspired by the ideas of the situationists. It's a mobile app, you can download it. It's on the App Store for iPhone and Android. And it's been used since then by over 70,000 people who have, every day people use it. And how it works is it provides random prompts or tasks for breaking the habitual or commercial patterns. And it functions through breaking the algorithmic logic of efficiency, consumption, and control. And so it's a kind of, or it facilitates a kind of playful resistance. And through that, it turns everyday navigation in the public space into a critique of how we are being controlled or manipulated in the public space. This is not the only way in which you can do this, particularly if we talk about digital tools that we might have at our disposal. You can consider things like a kind of algorithm disobedience walk, which uses GPS to not do what the GPS tells you to do. You could consider a kind of data shadows mapping, where you use notifications or ads to change how you behave in the public space, but not in the way that the notifications or ads maybe tell you to. You could consider a kind of reverse geocaching, but the dérive works with prompts that are presented to you as an individual. And if this might sound like you are going to miss out on all the interesting things in the public space, if you refuse to go to the things or the places that might be interesting, I am very much reminded in this context of a quote by the academic Laurie Waxman in her book on the history of Fluxus, situationists, and the surrealists, where she says, if something appears boring, you're just not looking hard enough. And so if we consider these tools as ways to implement digital dérives, they resist, what they are doing is they resist imposed algorithmic logic as much as physical dérives, what the situationists originally came up with, resisted urban planning. All right. So a few practical examples. I mentioned the Dérive app, the thing that I developed a long time ago and is still available. With the Dérive app, we regularly, occasionally host workshops in cities where participants discover unnoticed aspects of their surroundings using the app as a tool to do so. There is in Amsterdam, as another example, the Amsterdam Drift Club, which creates collective derives and turns them into artistic events. There is in the UK, it might be in Manchester, but I might misremember this at the moment, a group called Coded Geometry, which is a walking collective that extends psychogeography into the digital realm, mapping physical space alongside digital infrastructure like underground fiber optic networks and using that to navigate as an individual through the city. An example that I love is from a German artist whose name now escapes me, who in 2020 pulled around in Berlin a cart with 100 Android phones, all enabled with Google Maps, which as a result created traffic jams, or at least the perception of traffic jams wherever he would go, because 100 Android phones to get there made Google believe that 100 cars were piled up in a single location. So he managed to manipulate how Google perceived the city, and through that they redirected traffic in Berlin as a consequence. There was also, this is already a while back, the Yellow Arrow initiative in the US, which was an initiative where you could order stickers of yellow arrows with a code on it. You could stick them on the wall or you could stick them on the floor pointing to something. And then the code, unique code that was on there, allowed you to leave a message for that place and for others to retrieve those messages that others had left, creating a kind of alternative to bronze plaques, or in the UK, the blue cultural history plaques that you see on many buildings. But user owned, if you will. Another example is Converse Snitch by Brian House, a project where he replaced light bulbs in the public space with microphones. And the last example that I want to mention is the Transborder Immigrant Tool by the Electronic Disturbance Theater. Although this was never fully implemented, but this was a mobile app which was designed to help migrants on the Mexican-US border to have access, to give them access to information on where they would be able to get to drink, where they would be able to get food, where they would be able to get transport to navigate themselves across the Mexican-American border. Now, what all these examples have in common is that they show that walking or moving through the public space can be reimagined as both play and protest by subverting the technology we use to facilitate our movement. And so the question that I'm going to now with the presentation is, how do we reclaim not just the streets, but also the interface, because of the commercialization of the private space through the interface? How do we reclaim ownership of that interaction? Now, to illustrate how I believe that we can take back that control is, I'm going to put two quotes together from Steve Bannon, one from Steve Bannon and one from Guy Debord. Guy Debord was, of course, the central character in the Situationist movement, and Steve Bannon is a bit of a firebrand, but also was the campaign manager for Donald Trump in the 2015 election cycle for the US presidency. Now, Steve Bannon famously at the time said that Steve Bannon at the time identified not as a supporter of the Republican Party, identified not the Democratic Party as their real opposition, but he said the real opposition is the media. And he said the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with shit. And this is exactly what Bannon has been doing and is still doing, and what Trump has been doing ever since and is still doing. He comes up with absurdist comments or ideas, and by the time there is any pushback against these absurdist ideas, the next absurdist idea has already been sprouted by Bannon or Trump, which allows them to keep control of the narrative. Now, in opposition to this, in 55, I think, Guy Debord said in one of his publications, we must try to flood the market with a wave of desires whose realization can be achieved through the available means of action of the material world. Now, this doesn't sound as nice as the short quote by Bannon, But what it means, or what de Boer with that was saying, that he was arguing that instead of reforming old institutions or changing the way we were interacting, what we should do is we should create new desires that can be realized with what is already around us. That is, or change what we have at our disposal and use these tools at our advantage to the detriment of those who want to control us. At the time, when de Boer was saying, he was identifying that desires were channeled by urban planning, the physical space, advertising, and mass media. And the derive was one example of through which we as individuals could facilitate a kind of counter practice. It produced playful longings for exploration and freedom, realized simply by walking differently. And so how that works in practice, or what that then means in other words, is big tech in Bannon's style today scripts desires through algorithms, push notifications, and endless feeds. And to flood the market in de Boer's meaning of this term would be to see desires for curiosity, slowness, and serendipity. Desires we can realize using the devices and infrastructure we already hold in our hands. So perhaps to reemphasize, the situationists remind us with those quotes and with those ideas, but transported to where we are now, that resistance doesn't come from waiting for new systems to be built, but from repurposing the material means at hand, whether that's the streets that we move through or the screens that we have in our hands, allowing us to move towards new liberating desires. And so we're starting to wrap up, where in the 50s and 60s, public space was commercialized by big capital through malls, billboards, and privatized squares. Private space now, what we have on our phones, what we think is a private environment, is commercialized by big tech through apps, notifications, and trackers. So with a background understanding that walking can become political when it resists these logics of control, if we reframe it, walking as critical, playful, and disobedient. But now that the arena in which this control has changed from the physical to the digital, or more and more from the physical to the digital, we also will need digital psychogeography, experimental, playful, collective practices that map these new freedoms for us onto both the street and the screen. And so, wrapping up, I see the derive as a tool, as the leitmotif here in this resistance, and the derive as a bridge between situationist legacy and current digital critique, or critique on the digital environments that are being pushed onto us. Because moving through public space is seldom neutral. It is guided, nudged, and commodified by signs, brands, algorithms in the public space, and more by servers in the digital space that all extract value by others from us. And so the choice that we have is whether to follow these scripts written for us or to drift beyond them, ground as well as through our phones. And now I'm going to close with another question, and that is really a question to you. And that is, in practice, how do we disrupt the intentions of big tech and take back control by repurposing what big tech uses to manipulate us to our benefit? And that's where I would like to leave it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You're really the first here in during these 3 days of walking who ends up with a question to us. But first of all, I think we can also start with a question to you first of all. And when I would like to start, because it's your opening of course, a very new debate in our seminar concerning these political aspects of this commercially driven walking, which we are all captured, consciously or not consciously, so perfectly driven. For me, the first question, if I open to you, would be how this new style of political aspect of walking becomes also powerful. So how we can create with that really a change of this so strongly dominated attirement of our walking activity, which is physically a freedom activity, because everyone can make the choice if I want to walk or not, if I want to come into movement or not. But that political aspect become also powerful against this big tech-driven aspect of commercialization. So I give back a little bit the question that you maybe raised for us.
You dropped out a few times in you asking your question, so I'm going to rephrase what I think I heard. Your question is, how can we push back in practice against this manipulation?
Yeah, how this political sense of walking that you described with these situationists, how this will become also powerful in the sense that it will be really also attire a lot of people and creating maybe really this political change.
How can it lead to political change? Um, um, in the end, I believe it's really very much about awareness, because what the situationists also identified in the 50s and 60s, and what we have more and more a problem of in the digital realm, is that we are being told what to do without realizing that we are being told what to do. And so that opens up the possibility of this manipulation. If we don't know that we are being manipulated, we also cannot push back against this manipulation. And that is not to say that everyone in the world who disagree with the political systems that are being imposed on them, but what it does imply is that the large swaths of people have never given thought to what it is that they really would like to see society shaped as, because they are being manipulated and accepting it in a particular way. So if we are able to facilitate this, if we, you, me, are able to facilitate this awareness, how we are being manipulated, we can think about what it is that we really actually want to see in reality, in practice, based on what our own desires and interests are. And if we are able to point to this manipulation, whether it's in the public space or the private space, we are facilitating that awareness. And then we are able to generate a discussion around what the individuals really would like, what us as individuals would really like to see society shaped as. And so that is, I think, how this can then change or lead to political change. Which is then a change towards or a change that reflects the actual desires, interests, and needs of the people at large. Does that answer your question?
May I just, yeah, of course. May I just add another aspect of this commercialization? The role you mentioned now, the role of each individual, who makes he has to get rid of and be aware of that happens. But what could be also the role of the urbanists? Because we are here also many people here, participants, which are involved in urbanism, in spatial planning, and so on. What could be the role for this deliberating of the urbanists, because they have the power to drive or not the people to freedom or not freedom.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. well, this is more a question for urbanists than for me, I think, but there's plenty of inspiration that can be had. And I'm not an architect, I'm not an urbanist, but if we go back to architects like Le Corbusier or you see now I'm paying the price for being up at 4:30 in the morning. The most famous Brazilian architect. That's terrible. I'm doing a quick Google.
Niemeyer.
Oscar Niemeyer, yeah, of course. Thank you very much. You see, I'm not an architect nor an urban planner. But indeed, Oscar Niemeyer and Le Corbusier both are examples of people with strong visions that really focus on empowering the individual in the public space. And we can argue about whether their visions are right or wrong, but the point here is that they had idealistic ideas and ideals about how society needed to be shaped, and use those ideals in their work to attempt to realize these ideals. So they were urban planners or architects, but very much related to the field of urban planning. So
I'm sure that the presentation, Babak, opens also a lot of questions here. Yes.
First, thank you very much for the really insightful talk. It was really rich of many interesting remarks. I just had a question because I didn't hear the organization mentioned at the beginning that you are part of, like a walkers collective or something. Not the app, but something.
Or something.
Else. I just
the organization is called Walk, Listen, Create. It's a network organization. That is to say, we facilitate creatives who use walking as an integral part of their artistic practice. It's free to join. You can go to the website, walklistencreate.org. And we currently have a network of over 2,000 contributing members.
Very impressive.
Please comment.
I don't know. I just had this thought of how do you think what pandemic made with people somehow as an introduction into the way to move day, and what would be a kind of a digital pandemia somehow also that confronts us that things are not working anymore somehow, or it's not really a clear thought, but it's kind of try to compare things happened that shaped our behavior and routines. And because you were asking us, what was your question? What forms of change? And yeah, maybe we got up not that early, but yeah, it's maybe also not.
Maybe it's already
so
too late.
That's not the true. No, we are high up in the mountains.
So the air is thin. I'm at sea level in Buenos Aires, where the air is good, right? But so is it. I'm sure in Switzerland. Well, it's not really a question, right? So it's more like a thought. But what I'm now reminded of with what you're saying is that how expectations have shifted of lots of citizens over the last few decades, is how our needs and desires are we expect our needs and desires to be immediately fulfilled. There has to be, with lots of the interactions that we have, there has to be an understanding that immediately we are supposed to be able to reap the benefits of the things that we do. That is to say, we can't wait 5 years for a political process to finish to be able to deliver what the promises are. And I do think that this is something that has increased or gotten worse during the pandemic. We all expect immediate change from the policies that are enacted, whereas some things take years to be implemented. And that is the result of the average citizen not understanding or not realizing the difficulties in actualizing shifts in society. And this comes back to that lack of awareness or that impression that's generated by big tech that that desires need to be immediately satisfied. Because when you scroll through your feed, you need to immediately be able to get those dopamine hits. And that's just not how reality works. But in the pandemic, everyone was on their phone getting dopamine hits immediately. Yeah, well, not really an answer, but also a thought.
So I thought I'd share, I'm not exactly sure if it's a political hack, but I guess I turned something that wants to sell me or advertise booking information into a game. Because with a booking app, you always get like pictures of all these places and like the best sort of rooms and the best hotels and these idyllic sort of landscapes. And I realized that it was actually kind of interesting because it does it randomly. So you get like different zones and different backgrounds and different architectures. So now I've taken to using this app just to play like, where am I? Where is this place in the world? And there's a similar app, it's called GeoGuessr, that works with Google, with Street View, where you just get like thrown out somewhere in the street of somewhere in the world, and then you compete online with other players to see where you are. So I guess I turned the booking app into that. So and then I have another question, because somehow you talk about using this sort of digital or technology in order to as an incentive for new ways and new ways of walking. But how about finding new ways of walking within the digital realm? No, there's all these different games. A lot. It has a lot to do with games, no, in the game community, and it's also connected to COVID, because you had like this like second world, where suddenly people were meeting in public spaces within the digital realm. So what are your thoughts on this other side of using technology as an incentive of new ways of walking?
Well, this is, well, if we talk about new ways of walking in the physical space, this is exactly what I'm talking about, right? If we're talking about new ways of walking in the digital, in the actual digital space, like, you know, I'm not so familiar with the games, but well, you used to have Second Life. This is a long time ago, but that was a digital space where people could freely move around in, which is an example, I think, of what you're describing. There's also, I know that Firefox or the Mozilla Foundation had an environment where you could virtually meet as an alternative to Zoom. So you would move around in a virtual space. It was a 3D environment where people could meet. Yeah, well, you know, in the end, these 3D, well, they don't have to be 3D environments. These open worlds, they are completely mediated, right? They're completely constructed. So whatever you're doing in these virtual worlds, even if you decide not to follow the protagonist's movements as you are supposed to finish the game, you are still doing everything in a world that is completely constructed around extracting value. These are commercial environments, the vast majority of them, that are designed to make money. So yeah, you will never be able to escape. It's a bit like being caught in the matrix, but then trying to stay in the matrix and pushing against Agent Smith's legs, right? That's not to say that lots of people actually do play, I don't know, what is it, Red Dawn Redemption or something, by not following the script, but by watching the scenery. I think that's great. Do with these tools what makes you happy, not what others tell you to do to make them happy.
Thank you very much. It's also the time in Switzerland is passing very fast, even at Sunday morning, even that it's not at 5 o'clock in the morning. But just one small question at the end, because we have unfortunately to finish, even that it's so fantastic and so interesting, your task. Yes?
And the very last there. Yeah. Yeah.
I start here. Yeah, with a woman.
I really appreciated how you said that we are being walked. Do you know, sometimes that without realizing it. And I think also interested in the sense of whether it's, you know, in the digital realm or also in the physical, kind of how limited, do you know, there is this sort of manipulation or these ideas of that keep us very limited in our thinking and
Yep.
very limited of what's
Yep,
possible, but
exactly this.
offering
Yep.
the full expect. And I think looking at ways of organizing, or something that I'm also really interested in, is how to open up, you know, like
Yep.
I think also Martin, he was saying today, opening ourselves up to
Yep.
all of those possibilities and kind of not letting a system dictating, but it's not
Yep.
even an anti-fascist or an anti-system. Do you know, it's somehow finding more the cracks. So ways that in your work, I think you found those cracks or those abilities to I think explore those other possibilities, because it's not an against. I think this is an important point somehow. Yeah.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, for me personally, it's also an against, but indeed, the point I'm raising really is this facilitation of the awareness. Whatever or whoever is using my apps or whatever, whatever their political ideas are, I don't really mind. What I do mind is that they are being restricted by the tools that they think are freeing them. So I want to facilitate this awareness, make them aware that they're being manipulated, and then they can more easily make their own choices. That is what matters.
Thank you for the talk. I just wanted to ask that I think a lot of things you're saying, you're actually pointing to the problem is not necessarily just about the interface. It's not even just about, you know, digital per se, but it's more about the political and social kind of relations behind it. And that's something we'll have to be aware of. So in that kind of sense, it's not really about moving away or moving more into the digital or the physical, but actually trying to challenge that kind of the relations behind it, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you're aware of some other kind of movements going on who are which are more actively or proactively trying to kind of contribute or maybe to correct those relations in the digital space. For example, like there are people are using a lot of, you know, cryptography and trying to do the decentralization of the different ownerships online, and they are contributing to the so-called metaverse or the universe in the digital world in a more libertarian or anarchist way. And how do you see that kind of movement going on, and how does it contribute to your research and our questions here?
Ooh. Give me an easy question, will you? Well, first of all, there is, I believe, not getting a back. I'm hoping I'm still with you. There is, to my knowledge and experience, not a lot of movement online around this concept, except perhaps indeed, as you point out, movements that are more libertarian, that are very individualistic. And I am not personally a huge fan of libertarian thought. I think it's very misguided because it is very individualistic. And that also, I think, is not at all what, if we look at the context of the presentation that I gave earlier, it's not at all what the situationists, but also maybe you could call them their spiritual successors, Fluxus, were propagating. They were, if anything, very, well, maybe only socialist, but maybe even communist. So very collective in their world view. That is, everyone needed to be, they've devised ways to allow everyone to be included. And libertarianism is the exact opposite of this. It's everyone for themselves. So, yeah, no, there's, I think what is more an example of the kinds of movements that we would need to be looking at is movements that actually bring people together, or who subvert the system to subvert this individualistic outlook on how society is supposed to work. And that's also exactly this individualism which these tools, the Facebook feed or whatever, tries to propagate. They want everyone to be individuals, so that they are not able to collaborate and collectively push back against this control. But I don't have concrete examples.
Thank you very much, Babak. I'm sorry we have to close up
No.
for the next lecture. Thank you very much. Just to end up, also it's perfectly matching with also the thesis of Lucius Burkhardt. Huh? In his name, we are here also making this seminar of Storelli, and he differs this triple viewing. So the first part of perceiving visually is the information gaining. The second is the physical gaining, and the third one is the symbols, the recognition of symbols and aspects. And so I think you're really focusing one of these crucial aspects of this triple viewing, huh? Which we are not so aware of it because we are all driven by information. Thank you very much joining us, and have a good day or night.
No, the day is starting. I'm looking forward to a relaxed Sunday in Buenos Aires.
Okay, fine. Best greetings to Buenos Aires. Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We have coffee break.
No,
Oh, sorry.
we have a talk. There's a second talk now, and then we do a very short coffee break, just a coffee, and then we go on walks again. But now we have
Okay. Okay. Funktioniert? Und Klang ist auch dann übertragen? Ja.
Ich gucke kurz hin, ob es eingestellt ist.
Weil Klang ist dann aber nicht in dem PDF. Also es ist dann einfach so.
Das ist korrekt.
Das heißt, ich mache es einfach an.
Ja, das kannst du einfach spielen. Das sollte
Okay,
funktionieren.
gut.
Findest du das alles gut?
Ja.
Okay, perfekt.
Vorschau. Okay.
Super. Okay.
Hello. So my name is Elisa. I'm an artist. I mainly work around the topic of time, and I structured the presentation as such that I will show you at first a bit of sound from a piece, and then I will read a text that is kind of like explaining or exploring the idea of chronomorphology.
And in the meantime, showing images sometimes of work. There's some sort of descriptions, and basically that's it. So. Premise. Time seems malleable and elusive. When it is described, this is often done in a variety of ways. For example, as a fundamental entity, as having a past and a future, being continuous and running, measurable, something to perceive and feel. This observation brought me to create a field of studies which I called chronomorphology. Time is a broad subject. It is intertwined with so many concepts and structures of cultures and communities, with scientific and non-scientific descriptions of reality as much as the subjective feeling each of us experience in everyday life. In order to partially understand some of its appearances, it is therefore interesting to research and associate a multitude of topics. Time is too often understood as a static phenomenon. Even though to state time is static feels like an oxymoron, you will recognize that the general idea we have of reality is that things change through time and space. In this scenario, time is treated as a sort of fundamental conceptual entity that is mostly in itself fixed, sometimes quantifiable and measurable. Nevertheless, even in its most precise physical descriptions, time ends up bearing variations. Gravity might change the speed at which the clocks run, or to ease calculations, time might be reversed. What if instead time itself would change over time? And with change, I don't mean just the speed or the direction of its flow, like in various sci-fi narratives. Rather, change as a construction in itself. Time might be something that doesn't flow, for example. It might not exist as a fundamental entity. It might be a multiple. Although this may seem like absurd speculations, once one starts to study how time was understood, depicted, and talked about around the world before it became atomic and global, it becomes clear that these ideas are not more absurd than the common understanding we have of it, divided in some pasts, presents, futures, flowing in one direction, trapped in various forms of oscillations. It takes an effort to imagine a society that lived in a different temporal landscape and the effect it left on the one we inhabit. There is a simple example that I often tell to show the subtle effect of a shift left in the actual temporal scenery. Until about 2 centuries ago in Italy, the day started at sunset. This might seem like a simple, interesting, and maybe surprising anecdote at first. Now the day starts at midnight. Sunset is just some other moment of the day. I want to elucidate the details of the astronomical reckoning of a day by using sunset as a start. Rather, let's think of what it means to walk through everyday life with the habit of knowing that the day ends and starts again with the sun setting. For most of activity, this won't do much of a difference. Eating, sleeping time are rather internal factors. The system was easier for calculating how much light was left on the day by subtracting from 24 the number of church bells beatings. So working time wouldn't be influenced as much either. But to count the hours as such might mean that the organization of a rite of various kinds happen in a slightly different frame. Rites can be of social, political, religious, or economical sort, or as often is and was an amalgam of these things. We are all acquainted with the ritual of Christmas Eve. Maybe not so many know that in different regions this festivity is celebrated on different days. In Germany, Christmas is the 24th of December. In Italy, the 25th. In Italy, the 24th is the Vigilia di Natale. Vigilia is a word that means wakefulness. Vigil is a period of purposeful sleeplessness. So the modern habit of calling Vigilia the day before Christmas is strange, but was probably necessary to fit in the variety of traditions that were absorbed from the original start of Christmas Day, the sunset of the 21st. This is, of course, just a cute example of a reminiscence in the present temporal landscape of a different time organization. In chronomorphology, All sorts of details about time are studied. These are sometimes simple and other times very complex and intricate. The intention of the research is to facilitate the understanding of time as a changing entity in itself. The reflected landscape and temporal clusters. BESSY-2 is a synchrotron radiation source located at the Helmholtz Institute in Berlin, Adlershof. In this facility, electrons are accelerated at almost the speed of light to generate a high-energy beam that emits photons. At BESSY-2, they emit a tender version of light called soft X-rays. These rays are used to illuminate various kinds of matter, for example, solar cells, materials for solar hydrogen production, and quantum materials, as well as proteins, meteorites, and archaeological finds. The ring where the electron beam travels is a sort of light bulb used to illuminate atoms, molecules, any bit of matter. The various experiments located around the ring are innovative microscopes, or in the physics jargon, detectors. These machines capture photons that didn't interact with the material to be analyzed. By doing so, it is possible to say that they detect something like the shadow of the material that was illuminated by the soft X-rays. The images, which in reality is a bunch of digits, can be computed to reconstruct the shape of the analyzed material. The material is not photographed per se, rather it is depicted by the shadow it casts. Of course, the detected results are not very clear and they are filled with disturbances. They are similar to the picture of a reflected landscape on the moving waves of a lake. If you imagine to flatten out the waves and disturbances on the lake, it would be possible to understand the image and therefore the landscape that it is depicted on the surface. Similarly, in Adlershof, by analyzing the spot where light was detected or not, and by eliminating noises, they are able to develop an image of the matter studied. For example, the well-known image of the coronavirus was produced as such. Time can be accessed just indirectly. We understand it through proxies, or by the shadows it casts on experiences we have and tell through things that we create. Proxies and shadows casted by time are the things that I try to investigate. In chronomorphology, time is studied like a reflected landscape, one that has been shaped through the eons. As we know, a landscape varies. When we observe it, there are mountains, the desert, the cities, and the sea. If we travel in cosmological space, there is also emptiness, the hot center of a star, or a black hole gravitational pull. We are used to know that the landscape changes over time. The shape of a mountain is created by the collision of tectonic plates, refined in its direction by the wind, and further modified by the melting glaciers, or simply by the change of seasons. The Earth's atmosphere could become unbalanced due to a meteorite collision. The sun started to fuse hydrogen about 4.5 billion years ago and will probably burn into nothing in about 5 billion years. Geomorphology and cosmology are scientific disciplines that study the Earth and the universe. They mostly have to deal with periods that are at the limit of imagination, light years, eons, billions of years. But they base their observations on what is left in our surroundings at the present moment. What reaches us from the past, the light of a long dead star, the sediments of seashells on top of the Alps. They track down interactions that created a shape, an event. Forms that lasted a while and that changed, either slowly, violently, create something else, or the rotation and revolution of the Earth, its geomagnetic fields, the gravitational effect of the moon, the weather, and many more factors influence and shape the surface and subsequent landscape of the planet we inhabit. Similarly, the temporal landscape is reflected and shaped by a variety of interacting factors. These are intertwined and messy. So as an exercise, I started to draw diagrams that connected them over and over again. I called them temporal clusters, mnemonic and didactic devices that map a changing landscape to facilitate understanding, and especially my own understanding. They are to be interpreted as static simplification. I group and map three main clusters that I believe that often interact within themselves and with each other to shape the temporal landscape that is time. These are the cluster time reckoning, the cluster body, and the cluster language. The cluster time reckoning is composed of clocks and timepieces, calendars, and time systems, the instruction to read and create clocks, timepieces, and calendars. These are apparatuses and systems were invented and developed through the century and among various cultures by studying movements in the sky, the moon, the sun, and other stars. They were needed to calculate and record durations of various kinds. Slowly, over the millennia, they become a symbol for time, letting us forget that they are systems that depict a mere approximation of it. Or more precisely, they might actually be responsible for creating an approximate idea of time itself. By studying details of clocks, astrolabia, and calendars of the past or of the future, we can see the impact of these technical inventions on society. Mostly, but not always, the changes in the mechanisms of a clock or the amount of days in a year slowly and tacitly started to modify the organization of labor, for example. But also, of course, they influence further development of the apparatuses and systems in themselves. These in turn enable scientific discoveries thanks to the new gained precision. Time measurement systems are a heritage of societal and scientific discoveries. It goes without saying that along with all this theoretical and technical development, the concept of time was modified, changed. For this reason, by studying time measurement systems, devices, and their technical and theoretical development, we can observe how people shape their measurement of time over time. The cluster body is composed of the human ways of perceiving, feeling, and understanding time. The body is a very complex system made of internal and external perceptions. Waves such as light or sound, microorganisms, cells, synapses, hormones, and many more biochemical entities constantly trigger signals. This compound of messages influences and makes us what we are by how we feel. We react constantly to external factors through senses, eyes, ears, touch, and to internal factors that we detect through feelings, hunger, fatigue, arousal. This amalgam of rhythms, the process of all this intertwined body activity, also shapes our idea of time. We observe time through movement in space and feel time through sensation in our body, a body that is constantly making an incredible effort, mostly unconsciously, to connect the tension between the feeling derived by the internal activity and the analysis of the external stimuli. The activity of the body is rich in time production. The brain thinks time, the guts feel it. Both shape it constantly and also very quickly. When we sleep, it seems to disappear. When we are bored, it never flows. When we are happy, it flies. The cluster language is composed of all the ways people communicate how we understand time by reckoning or description, how we perceive, feel, and remember it. There are various aspects that are interesting to study in this context: how time is described and talked about with various idioms, which words are used to talk about it, how the temporal structure of a language, its grammar, influence how time is thought, how is language depicted, how we write it and read it, and how the visual signs influence the understanding of time. My own understanding of language is very broad. I believe language is anything that we use to communicate certain feelings or reasoning to one another. Some languages have more rules than others, some are more specific. Art is a language as much as mathematics, as much as Italian to me. Generally, we believe to use language to describe our surrounding, experiences and feelings. But languages shape the way we perceive reality by the way we describe it. It is by comparing how facts are analyzed and described in various idioms that we can understand how things might seem to be what they are, but ultimately they might actually be very different. Described perceptions leads very often to this misconception. The earth is not flat, even though it mostly seems to be. So, of course, the way we communicate time influences its shape. It might be the fact that the times run, that the past is behind us, or that reality is continuous. Chronomorphology. Transitions, relations, absorptions, shifting, scattering, recomposition, and process. Actions that move and create subtle or major transformations with their movements. Verbs that are imbued with the feeling of time. Feedback loops and dirty waves that are difficult to predict, open systems that mess up consistency. Chronomorphology is a research based on scientific facts and myths from various eras worldwide. These are discovered and assembled together in a subjective way. The research and the art are full of contradictory statements, superposed state conveying in multidimensional poems. Chronomorphology is a developing attempt to make perceive, feel, and think how time might process in the past, present, future, or in imagination. It playfully challenges the essence of time. Statements such as time is what clock measure, time is circular, linear, or a geometry, time is earth. In chronomorphology, any phrase that starts with time is to be understood as a shape that lingers until it fades. Things, including time, are what they are until they recombine to become something else.
Thank you so much. Enriching. After this morning, we went to the fields. We said it were analog, local. Then we went to the digital sphere. Now you open it up to the planetary and also the aspect of time, of course. So, are there any questions or comments from the public? Yes.
I'm curious how you would answer the question Babak asked us. Or is there a connection between the digital and your research on time somehow? Or how do you relate like the digital tools we relate on and your research somehow?
It's a good question because it's actually my PhD topic. So my standpoint on that is that everything digital is discrete because it's based on the transistor, which is an electronic device, which is like built upon like quantum mechanisms. So I think what is interesting in the digital, it is that it is an amalgam of like gestures that get like translated into electric signals that then get reconstructed. So basically everything we do through digital, like moving, speaking, writing, whatever, is the same at the end of the day, the same material. It's just like, they say bits and bytes, but at the end it's mainly like small electric signals that get then recomputed into something that we see or hear or whatever. And for me, this is an interesting material because I think for once, this might kind of like shift our perception of reality from a continuous to a discrete environment, which we don't know if reality is continuous or, I mean, we like it very much, this idea. So even physicists, they still like go on with it. But then there's also this idea of the Planck scale, so that at some point things are actually looks like being discrete, so made of like individual bit particles. So this might be something like maybe reality is not continuous, it's discrete. And then what I like is that I think you can use these materials to actually like, and this is a bit what I'm doing in the PhD, it's like based on concrete poetry, which was already like a very analog way of amalgamate sounds and visual and language and this, but to kind of like make it discrete. So I'm kind of creating discrete poetry. And then, yeah, of course, in yeah, the digital adds a very temporal technical layer. So it's timed. These things are full of timers. It's just a bunch of clocks dealing with these signals. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's been so stimulating, and I really love actually how you bring back, you know, the idea of landscape. I just noted that how your method, the chronomorphology, is it correct, is studied as a landscape. I find it really very, very stimulating. I have to think about this a lot next. But what I wanted to ask you is really, you know, I think you introduced us to the idea of time as measurement, but also time as reality. And there were many philosophers, especially in the Western, you know, kind of intellectual tradition, like Bergson, you know, speaking about duress, so we are in the present and there is, you know, some kind of past and anticipation of the future, but there is no stride forward following up that kind of Aristotelian, you know, past, present, future on the line and so on and so forth, which you also brought up. Or, you know, there is Serre with this percolation of time, right? Or the kind of modernist notion of time that folds and, you know, there are different temporal zones or heterotemporalities by Bergson again or by Serre, or, you know, Foucauldian kind of heterochronies, right? How does this kind of Western philosophy of time influence your thinking? This is one part of my question. The other is, you know, there is like beyond Western intellectual tradition, there are all these indigenous conceptions of time, no? And it's been, I know it's being more and more popular recently to think through indigenous studies, but I also think, you know, the ideas how agrarian or earlier societies thought time as something that is, you know, connected with season, with harvesting, with celestial bodies movement, and so on and so forth. Yeah, I just wanted to ask whether there is some influence or whether you are perhaps borrowing or thinking of in the next future, kind of thinking this path, down this path.
Yeah, so actually it's one of my actual project also, like to, I mean, basically it's like I'm trying not to like as I say, like I like any sort of story about how time is like constructed. So there's like so it's a bit random what you encounter. It's like sometimes it's through people, sometimes you read a books that gives you some insight, and sometimes you visit certain museums and there are artifacts. Sometimes you go to the lab and then there's a new clock, and this kind of like it's such a broad topic that is basically impossible for one person, or probably also for all humanity, to actually like make a collection of it and say that's it. So so I basically, my method is just to wander or walk around, and what I encounter on the path of this research, then I collect and make some sort of like, well, this diagram or like a work or can be a text, whatever it is, it's a constellation. And then of course it's not an answer. I mean, it's one of the answer that one can give, or maybe it's a question or whatever. And yeah, so I think it's very interesting because sometimes even though different cultures have maybe a little different aspects, you can also sometimes see similarities, which I think it's very fascinating. Also, like lately I read a book by a linguist that they analyze different languages, because there's also this verb to be that is like, it was a little story of the verb to be. And there are some they don't have, or things like that. But then they end up realizing, well, the brain is constructed in such a way that at the end, all humans find some sort of similarity in it, although we have a lot of differences. So I kind of like these contradictions sometimes, and I often look for them. Yeah.
Time for another question, and then move on. Thank you.
Hey, I wanted to ask a bit about the sound piece that you showed us at the beginning. I'm really intrigued by the process of kind of going to this clock museum and recording those objects, and kind of, they really sounded like insects or like living beings. There's something about the idea of an object that kind of makes this continuous sound that gives it this like kind of animistic thing of it having like a heartbeat or a breath or something. And I just wanted to ask a bit about the relationship with those objects, and what was the process like of recording them, and kind of what does it mean for you to kind of gather them in this sound piece in which they become sort of a choir together. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, clocks were kind of like one of the starting point of my research, because, well, it's like such a cliche, like time clocks, you know. So I thought like it's interesting. And then when you look into the history of the clock, even though it's so variated, and also I have a thing for machines, so it's kind of like it was very interesting for me to like sort of track a different development of the machine itself. Maybe rebuild things. And then I had this residence in La Chaux-de-Fonds, of course. There's like it's like the place to be. So I contacted the museum and say like, yeah, I had this idea at some point that I wanted to sonify the history of the clock. So sonification is generally something that is done with data. So you record data of things, and then, or you not record, you have data, and then you basically translate it to sounds. And so, and in this case, I shifted a little bit this concept. How can you like sonify the history of the clock? Was mainly like it's not the data, is the machines, and somehow these are like it's done with like contact microphones, so they pick up the vibration inside of the material rather than waves that are through the air, which is what usual microphones like this picks up. And therefore it's amplified, and you hear a different kind of like the resonance of the machine, basically. And then then it was my like personal decision to create this generative like installation, like work, which is like picking like combining and recombining these records. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thanks again. Before we have a very short tea, the two workshop which just follow now, Lisa and Mimi and Jana, will give you a short kind of intro